The unexpected guardian. Marcus Webb had exactly 3 rules for surviving diplomatic missions. First, stay invisible. Second, fix things quietly. Third, never, under any circumstances, end up in the same room as actual diplomats. He was currently failing rule number 3 in the most spectacular way possible. The maintenance bay of the Horizon's Edge had seemed safe enough 20 minutes ago. Marcus had been elbow-deep in a malfunctioning air recycler, perfectly content in his world of tools and mechanical problems that had actual solutions. Then Chief Engineer Reeves had appeared, looking harried and desperate, explaining that they needed every available crew member for the landing ceremony. Something about showing numbers and respect and making humanity look impressive. Marcus had tried to argue. He really had. But Reeves had already moved on to the next victim, and before Marcus knew it, he was being herded into an ill-fitting dress uniform that smelled like mothballs and someone else's anxiety. The uniform was too tight across the shoulders and too loose at the waist, making him look like a child wearing his father's clothes. Perfect. Just perfect. Now he stood in what could only be described as controlled chaos, watching the Zareth homeworld grow larger through the observation windows of their shuttle. The planet shimmered like a pearl, its surface covered in crystalline structures that caught and reflected light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Beautiful and utterly alien. The shuttle descended through clouds that weren't quite clouds, passing formations that weren't quite buildings, until they landed in a courtyard that definitely wasn't quite stone. Everything here existed in that uncomfortable space between familiar and fundamentally wrong, like looking at your own reflection and realizing the eyes weren't quite right. Marcus shuffled out with the other crew members trying to blend into the background. The Zareth delegation was waiting, and his first thought was that the briefing videos hadn't done them justice. They were humanoid, yes, but in the way that a painting of a person is humanoid. Close enough to be recognizable, different enough to trigger every instinctive alarm that whispered other. They stood taller than most humans, with skin that had an almost translucent quality, showing hints of light moving beneath the surface like bioluminescence in deep ocean creatures. Their eyes were larger, entirely black except for points of light that drifted like stars. But it was their features, smooth and refined, that made them seem ageless, neither young nor old but somehow existing outside the normal progression of time. The Zareth wore robes that seemed to be woven from solidified light, changing colors as they moved. Marcus's engineer brain immediately wanted to know how that worked, what material could do that, before his survival instinct kicked in and reminded him that asking technical questions during formal ceremonies was probably on someone's list of diplomatic incidents to avoid. The human delegation, led by Captain Rodriguez, moved forward with practiced precision. Rodriguez was a career diplomat, the kind of man who could smile while being insulted and thank you for the privilege. Marcus had met him exactly once during boarding and had immediately recognized a kindred spirit in misery. Rodriguez hated space travel. Marcus hated formal events. They'd nodded at each other in mutual understanding and hadn't spoken since. The procession began moving toward the palace, and Marcus found himself swept along in the current of bodies. The Zareth palace wasn't built so much as grown, rising from the planet's surface in organic curves and crystalline spires that hummed with a frequency he felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. Every surface reflected and refracted light, creating the disorienting effect of walking through a living kaleidoscope. Inside the main hall, the ceremony began. The Zareth clearly took their formalities seriously. There were speeches in their melodic language that Marcus's translation implant struggled to process, rendering phrases that came out as things like, the stars between recognition, and harmony of separated waters finding confluence. Poetic, maybe, but Marcus had no idea what any of it actually meant. He positioned himself near a pillar, trying to achieve maximum invisibility. The hall was filled with Zareth nobles, each radiating an air of importance that made Marcus's maintenance uniform feel even more out of place. At the far end, on a raised platform that seemed to float without visible support, sat the royal family. Queen Lishra commanded attention without effort. She sat perfectly still, her robes flowing around her like liquid silver, her expression unreadable. Beside her, slightly lower and to the left in a way that screamed hierarchy, sat Princess Sienna. She was younger, maybe equivalent to a human in her 30s, with the same otherworldly beauty but with something more accessible in her bearing. Something almost tired. Between them, surrounded by 4 attendants who looked ready to intercept meteors, stood a small figure that Marcus had been specifically instructed not to look at, think about, or acknowledge. Prince Kale, the heir, 6 years old in Zareth terms, which his implant helpfully noted was roughly equivalent to a human 7-year-old. Marcus looked anyway because 34 years of life had taught him that forbidden things were usually forbidden for interesting reasons. The kid looked absolutely miserable. He wore miniature formal robes that probably cost more than Marcus's entire year's salary, and he was fidgeting with the kind of universal body language that transcended species. One of the attendants kept adjusting his collar. Cale kept pulling away, his small hands batting at the fussing fingers. The ceremony dragged on. Captain Rodriguez was exchanging formal pleasantries with the Queen, each sentence taking approximately 3 times longer than necessary due to translation delays and cultural padding. Marcus's feet hurt. The dress shoes were half a size too small, and he was developing a blister on his left heel that he knew would bother him for days. He shifted his weight, trying to find a position that didn't make his feet scream. The crystalline floor was beautiful but offered zero comfort. Somewhere in the middle of an exchange about mutual prosperity and the brightness of shared futures, Marcus made the mistake of taking a step backward, trying to ease the pressure on his heel. His shoe made a sound. Not a loud sound, just a small squeak of synthetic leather on crystal, but in the hushed formality of the ceremony, it might as well have been a gunshot. Every Zareth head turned toward him. Marcus froze, achieving the kind of stillness that his old combat medic training had drilled into him. Don't move. Don't breathe. Become part of the background. Captain Rodriguez shot him a look that could have flash-frozen water. The moment stretched, eternal and horrible, before the Zareth attention mercifully shifted back to the ceremony. Marcus made a mental note to burn these shoes at the earliest opportunity. He was concentrating so hard on not making another sound that he almost missed the movement. Small movement at odds with the general stillness. Prince Cale had managed to squirm partially free from his attendants, taking advantage of a moment when adult attention was focused on the speeches. The child was edging sideways, his small face showing an expression Marcus recognized from every kid who'd ever been trapped in a boring adult situation. One of the attendants noticed, reached for him. Cale ducked under the grasping hand with surprising agility. Marcus watched with detached interest, the way you might watch a bird trying to escape through a window. Not his problem. Not his responsibility. Definitely not something he should get involved with. The child moved faster now, weaving between clusters of nobles with the kind of skill that suggested this wasn't his first escape attempt. Marcus noticed something odd. Cale's head was moving in a searching pattern like he was looking for something specific. The boy's large eyes swept across the crowd, dismissing each person he encountered, searching. Then those eyes locked onto Marcus. Time did something strange. Marcus felt the moment stretch and compress simultaneously as he watched the child's expression transform from desperate escape to something that looked uncomfortably like relief. Recognition even though they'd never met. Understanding even though understanding should have been impossible. Oh no, Marcus thought. Cale changed direction with clear purpose, and Marcus realized with slowly dawning horror that the child was running straight toward him. Directly toward him. Through the crowd of nobles and guards and very important people who would very much not want a human maintenance engineer interacting with their royal heir. Marcus had maybe 3 seconds to make a decision. His mind, trained by years of emergency medical situations, cycled through options at high speed. Move away. Risk looking like he was fleeing from a child, probably cause an incident. Try to redirect the kid. Risk touching the air, definitely cause an incident. Or stand absolutely still and hope that somehow, impossibly, this would work out. He chose stillness because it was the only option that didn't involve actively making things worse. Sometimes the best action was no action. Sometimes you just had to let the disaster happen and deal with the consequences. Cale covered the distance in seconds, his small legs moving with surprising speed. The child moved like water, flowing through gaps in the crowd that Marcus wouldn't have thought existed. And then, before anyone could react, before the guards could intercept, before the attendants could grab him back, Cale did something that would later be analyzed by xenopsychologists and debated in diplomatic circles for years. He ran directly behind Marcus's legs and wrapped both small arms around Marcus's left calf, holding on with surprising strength. The silence that followed was profound. Absolute. The kind of silence that suggested the universe itself had paused to process what just happened. Marcus stood perfectly still, his arms at his sides, his breathing controlled, his entire body radiating "I am not a threat, please don't shoot me." He could feel the child pressed against his leg, trembling slightly, and something else. Something warm that wasn't physical temperature but felt like it anyway. A presence that touched something inside his chest, curious and frightened and desperately seeking safety. The guards moved first. 6 of them, converging from different positions, their weapons coming up to ready positions. The weapons didn't look like guns. They looked like staffs made of the same crystalline material as everything else, but Marcus's survival instinct screamed that they were very, very dangerous. The kind of dangerous that made bullets seem quaint. Captain Rodriguez had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing as he cycled through what must have been every diplomatic protocol he'd ever learned, finding nothing applicable. The Zareth nobles had frozen mid-gesture, their expressions cycling through shock and confusion. Several of them were making sounds that Marcus's implant struggled to translate, offering suggestions ranging from impossible configuration to reality malfunction detected. Princess Sienna stood so fast her chair made a sound like ice cracking. Her face went through several emotions in rapid succession before settling on something between disbelief and complete reordering of her understanding of the universe. She moved forward with controlled urgency, like someone approaching an armed bomb. But it was Queen Lishra's reaction that made Marcus's heart rate kick into emergency mode. She rose from her throne slowly, deliberately, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. She was staring at Marcus with an intensity that made him want to check if he'd spontaneously caught fire. "Kale," Princess Sienna said, and her voice came out strained. She switched to Zareth, speaking rapidly, and Marcus's implant translated in real time. "Kale, sweetness, come to mother. Come away from the stranger." The child didn't move. If anything, he pressed closer, and that strange warmth in Marcus's chest intensified. It felt like someone was shining a light directly into his thoughts, looking for something specific. Reading him. The briefing had mentioned this. Zareth children were empathic, able to sense emotional states in ways that went far beyond human capability. They perceived feelings as actual sensory data, the way humans perceived color or sound. Right now, Kale was apparently reading Marcus as safe, as protection, as refuge. The kid either had excellent instincts or terrible ones, and Marcus genuinely wasn't sure which. One of the guards stepped closer, and Marcus heard the weapon hum with a frequency that made his teeth ache. He kept his hands visible, his posture non-threatening, his entire body language screaming, "I am not dangerous, please believe me." "Easy," Marcus said quietly, keeping his voice level. "He's fine. I'm not moving. Nobody needs to do anything dramatic." The elderly Zareth advisor, who'd been conducting the ceremony, stepped forward. His robes were more elaborate than the others, covered in symbols that probably meant something important. He said something in rapid Zareth that Marcus's implant translated as, "Unprecedented empathic response detected. Child displaying trust-bonding behavior with non-compatible entity. This should not occur within our understanding of reality." "Well," Marcus said, maintaining his absolute stillness while a 6-year-old alien clung to his leg and guards prepared to possibly disintegrate him, "maybe your understanding of reality needs updating." The advisor blinked, which involved 3 eyelids moving in sequence, and actually looked directly at Marcus for the first time. "The outsider speaks truth," he said slowly, and several nobles made surprised sounds. Princess Sienna had reached them now, moving with careful slowness. She knelt, another gesture that made several nobles gasp, and reached toward her son. "Kale," she said softly, "why are you hiding from mother?" The child peeked around Marcus's leg, meeting his mother's eyes, and said something that made every Zareth in the hall go very still. Marcus's implant translated, "He feels quiet, mother. Quiet inside. Not loud like everyone else. Just quiet and safe." The princess looked up at Marcus, and he saw her really seeing him for the first time. Not as an outsider, not as a diplomatic problem, but as a puzzle that had just rearranged itself into an impossible shape. "What are you?" she asked, and her voice held genuine wonder. Marcus considered several answers and settled on honesty. "Ma'am, I'm just a maintenance engineer who's really out of his depth right now. But I promise I'm not going to hurt him. I'm not going to hurt anyone. I'm just going to stand here until someone tells me what I'm supposed to do, because this definitely wasn't covered in the briefing." Queen Lishra descended from her throne, and every eye in the hall tracked her movement. She stopped 3 meters away, studying Marcus with those star-filled eyes. "My grandson," she said carefully, "has never sought comfort from anyone outside the bloodline. Our children do not make mistakes in their empathic assessments. They cannot. It is not in their nature." Marcus nodded fractionally, the smallest acknowledgement he could manage. He was acutely aware of Kale still clinging to his leg, of the warmth still present in his chest, of the dozen weapons still pointed in his general direction. "So either you are the first being in recorded history to deceive a Zareth child's instincts," the queen continued, "or you are something we have profoundly misunderstood about your species." "Your Majesty," Marcus said quietly, "I'm really just a guy with a toolbox who ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if it helps, I spent 2 years as a combat medic in the relief corps. I've held a lot of scared kids while their worlds fell apart. Maybe your grandson is just picking up on that. Maybe I just feel familiar." The Queen's expression shifted, something softening in those alien features. "You have experience with frightened children. More than I'd like, ma'am. War zones don't really care about age." Princess Sienna was still kneeling beside them, close enough now that Marcus could see the intricate patterns of light moving beneath her skin. "You are a healer," she said, and it wasn't a question. Was a healer. "Now I fix air recyclers. Turns out, machinery doesn't give you PTSD. Marcus caught himself. "Sorry?" That was probably too honest for a diplomatic situation. But the Queen made a gesture, touching 2 fingers to her forehead and sweeping them outward in an arc that left faint trails of light in the air. "Lower your weapons," she commanded, and every guard in the hall complied, though they maintained ready positions. Progress, Marcus thought. Small, terrifying progress. "Tell me, Marcus Webb," the Queen said, and Marcus realized with a start that she'd somehow learned his name. "What do you feel when you look at my grandson?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Cale was still pressed against his leg, and that strange warmth still resided behind his sternum. "Honestly? Mostly I feel like I'm about to get fired. But also..." He paused, searching for words. He's scared. Or he was scared. All this ceremony, all these people staring, all this weight of expectation. He's just a kid who wanted somewhere quiet to hide. And I guess I looked quiet. "You perceive his emotional state," the advisor said, surprise evident in his voice. "Without empathic capabilities, you perceive it. I mean, I've got eyes." Kid was practically vibrating with stress before he made his break for it. The Queen and Princess exchanged a long look, something passing between them that Marcus couldn't interpret. When the Queen spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming less formal, more genuine. "Marcus Webb, former healer, current repairer of air circulation systems, you have created an unprecedented situation. My grandson has chosen you as a source of safety. This has never happened with an outsider. Never in our recorded history." "I'm sorry?" Marcus offered, because what else could you say? "Do not apologize," Princess Sienna said, standing. "If Cale has chosen to trust you, then there is something in you worthy of trust. Our children see truth that adults miss. They perceive the heart beneath the surface." She looked at her son, still clinging to Marcus's leg. "Cale, will you come to mother now?" The child looked up at Marcus, those large black eyes with their drifting points of light meeting his own. Marcus felt that presence in his chest intensify, and suddenly he understood. Not through words or images, but through pure feeling. The kid was asking permission. Asking if it was safe to go. "It's okay, buddy," Marcus said softly. "Your mom's right here. She'll keep you safe." Cale hesitated one more moment, then slowly released his grip on Marcus's leg. He moved to his mother, who scooped him up with visible relief, holding him close. But the child kept looking back at Marcus, and that warmth in Marcus's chest didn't fade. Queen Lishra stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell something like ozone and starlight. "You will join us for the remainder of the ceremony," she said. It wasn't a request. "And afterward, we will speak more about this impossible thing that has occurred." "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus said, because what else could he do? As he was escorted to a position of honor that he absolutely did not deserve, Marcus caught Captain Rodriguez's eye. The diplomat looked like he couldn't decide whether to promote Marcus or space him. Marcus sympathized. He couldn't decide either. But as the ceremony continued, and he felt that lingering warmth in his chest, Marcus realized something important. Whatever had just happened, whatever impossible connection had formed between a human maintenance engineer and a Zareth royal child, it had changed something fundamental. The careful diplomatic distance that had defined human-Zareth relations had just been shattered by a frightened 6-year-old looking for somewhere quiet to hide. And somehow, impossibly, Marcus had become the bridge between worlds. He really hoped his resume was up to date. The bridge between worlds. The diplomatic quarters they'd assigned Marcus were nicer than his entire apartment back on Earth. The walls weren't walls in the traditional sense, but rather surfaces that shifted between opacity and transparency based on some mechanism he couldn't identify. The furniture grew from the floor like crystalline sculptures, somehow conforming to human proportions despite being designed by aliens. It was beautiful, uncomfortable, and deeply unsettling in equal measure. Marcus sat on what he assumed was a bed, though it felt more like sitting on solidified light, and tried to process the last 3 hours of his life. After the ceremony, he'd been escorted here by a pair of guards who maintained a careful 3-meter distance, as if he might explode or start performing unauthorized empathic bonding at any moment. Captain Rodriguez had pulled him aside long enough to say, "Don't touch anything, don't agree to anything, and for the love of everything holy, don't let that child near you again until we figure out what's happening." Too late for at least one of those directives. There was a sound like wind chimes made of light, and a portion of the wall shimmered into transparency. Princess Sienna stood in the doorway, Kale tucked against her side, holding her hand. The child's eyes found Marcus immediately, and that warmth bloomed in his chest again, like someone had lit a candle behind his ribs. "May we enter?" the princess asked, and Marcus noticed she was speaking Terran Standard now, her accent musical but clear. "Of course, Your Highness. Though I should warn you, I have no idea what the protocol is for royal visits to confused maintenance engineers." A small smile touched her lips. "There is no protocol. This situation exists outside all known protocols." She guided Kale into the room, and the child immediately gravitated toward Marcus, not climbing on him but standing close, within arm's reach. The princess watched this with an expression that mixed wonder and concern. "He has been asking about you. The quiet man he calls you. He wants to know if you are real or if he imagined you." Marcus looked down at Kale, who was staring up at him with those impossible star-filled eyes. "I'm real, buddy. About as real as it gets. Though I'll admit today hasn't felt particularly real for me either." "May I sit?" the princess asked, gesturing to one of the crystalline chairs that had grown from the floor. "It's your palace, ma'am. I'm pretty sure you can do whatever you want." She sat with fluid grace, arranging her robes carefully. Kale remained standing next to Marcus, occasionally glancing up at him as if confirming his continued existence. "I need to understand what happened today," she said. "For my son's safety, for diplomatic relations, and perhaps for my own peace of mind." Marcus nodded. "I'll tell you what I can, but honestly, I'm as confused as you are. One minute I was trying to be invisible during a ceremony, the next minute your son decided I was the safest person in a room full of his own people. You said you were a healer. In war zones. Combat medic, yes. 3 years in the relief corps, mostly in conflict areas where the regular medical infrastructure had collapsed. I patched people up, kept them alive long enough to reach proper facilities. Kids, adults didn't matter. If they were bleeding, I stopped it. And this gave you post-traumatic stress disorder." She said the term carefully, like she'd looked it up specifically. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Yeah. Turns out, watching children die because you don't have the right equipment or enough time, or just because the universe is fundamentally unfair, does things to your head. Who knew?" Kale made a small sound and pressed closer. Marcus realized the child was responding to his emotional state, feeling the old pain and anger that still lived in Marcus's chest like shrapnel he couldn't remove. "I'm okay, Kale," Marcus said softly. "That was a long time ago. Different life. But it still hurts you," Princess Sienna said. "The memories still cause pain. Every day. But you learn to live with it. You have to, or it consumes you." Marcus looked at her directly. "Is that what your son felt? The pain? Because if I scared him somehow—" "No," she interrupted. "No, that is not what he felt. Kale, can you tell Marcus what you perceived?" The child looked up at Marcus, and when he spoke, his voice was high and clear, but the words came through Marcus's implant as precise translation. "You carry sadness, but it is old sadness. Worn smooth like river stones. It does not cut anymore. And beneath it there is something else. Something that wants to help. To protect. To make the hurting stop." Kale tilted his head. Everyone else in that room was loud. Their feelings were bright and sharp and pushed at me like wind. But you were quiet. Like a deep pool where the water is still. Marcus felt something catch in his throat. "I didn't know anyone could see that." "Our children perceive emotional truth," the princess explained. "They sense the fundamental nature of a being before they learn to interpret social complexity or political necessity. Kale felt your essential character and he found it trustworthy. More than trustworthy. Safe. But I'm human. I thought your briefing materials said humans were emotionally opaque to Zareth." "They do. Or they did. Our scientists have long believed that human emotional patterns exist on frequencies we cannot perceive. Like colors beyond our visual spectrum. We knew humans had feelings, but we could not sense them the way we sense each other." She gestured to Kale. "But children perceive differently. Their abilities are raw, unfiltered by adult conditioning. Perhaps they can sense frequencies that adult Zareth cannot." Marcus processed this. "So your son is basically detecting emotional wavelengths that your people didn't know existed." That is one interpretation. Another is that you, specifically, emit patterns that are unusually clear. That your emotional state is somehow more accessible than other humans. Great. I'm emotionally loud. That's definitely something I wanted to learn about myself today. The princess smiled, genuine amusement touching her features. You use humor to deflect discomfort. Kale senses that too. He finds it endearing. Marcus looked down at the child, who was now examining the fabric of Marcus's sleeve with careful fingers, feeling the weave. You're reading a lot into a guy who just stands really still and hopes things work out. Are you uncomfortable with Kale's presence? She asked, her tone becoming more serious. Marcus considered lying, then remembered he was apparently emotionally transparent to a 6-year-old empath. No. Honestly, it's weird but not bad weird. I spent years in situations where scared kids needed someone stable, someone who wouldn't fall apart. I guess I got good at being that person. Your son needed that today and apparently I was available. You understand children. I understand scared. Scared is universal. It doesn't matter if you have 2 legs or 4, if you breathe oxygen or methane, scared looks the same. And scared needs the same thing. Someone to say, I'm here, you're safe, it's going to be okay. Kale looked up at him and said something in Zareth that the implant translated as, you promise truth when you say those words. Others say them but they do not believe them. You believe them. Marcus felt that candle warmth in his chest grow stronger. I try to, buddy. I try to mean what I say. There was a pause, filled only with the ambient hum of the palace, that ever-present frequency that Marcus was slowly getting used to. Princess Sienna studied him with an intensity that reminded him of medical scans, like she was looking through him rather than at him. My mother wishes to speak with you, she said finally. She has convened an emergency council to discuss the implications of what happened today. Your Captain Rodriguez is quite distressed about the diplomatic ramifications. Yeah, I imagine he is. I'm pretty sure, maintenance guy accidentally becomes significant to alien royalty, wasn't in anyone's mission plan. Will you attend? The council meets in 2 hours. Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, Marcus Webb. We are not your captors. But your presence would help us understand something unprecedented. And perhaps help you understand it as well. Marcus looked at Kale, who was now leaning against his leg in a posture of complete trust. The warmth in his chest pulsed gently, like a second heartbeat that wasn't quite his own. Yeah, okay. I'll come. But I'm warning you, I'm really bad at formal meetings. I once fell asleep during a safety briefing about explosive decompression. The princess stood, her robes flowing around her like liquid silver. I suspect this meeting will be sufficiently interesting to keep you awake. She held out her hand to Kale. Come, sweetness. Marcus needs time to prepare. Kale looked reluctant but took his mother's hand. Before leaving, he turned back to Marcus and said, You will not disappear? I'll be right here, buddy. Promise. The child seemed satisfied with this and allowed himself to be led away. The wall shimmered back to opacity, and Marcus was alone again with his thoughts and the lingering warmth in his chest that refused to fade. He had 2 hours. He should probably figure out what he was going to say to a council of alien dignitaries about why their heir had decided a random human was trustworthy. He should probably contact Captain Rodriguez and get briefed on diplomatic protocols. He should probably do a lot of things. Instead, he lay back on the crystalline bed and stared at the ceiling, which was currently displaying what looked like a star field, and wondered how his life had gotten so profoundly strange. The council chamber was less formal than the greeting hall but no less impressive. It was circular, with a domed ceiling that displayed the actual sky above the palace, somehow transmitted through layers of crystal and stone. Around the perimeter sat 12 Zareth elders, each wearing robes that indicated their role in society. Marcus's implant helpfully identified them as representatives of science, military, culture, religion, and various other specialties he didn't fully understand. Queen Lishara sat at the head of a table that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, Princess Sienna to her right. Kale was mercifully absent, probably being watched by his attendants. Captain Rodriguez sat stiffly to the left, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. When Marcus entered, escorted by guards who still maintained that careful distance, Rodriguez shot him a look that clearly said, Please don't make this worse. Marcus took the seat indicated, which placed him directly across from the Queen. Great. No pressure. Marcus Webb, Queen Lishara began, her voice filling the chamber without seeming to increase in volume. Thank you for joining us. We have a situation without precedent, and we require your perspective to understand it. Your Majesty, I'll help however I can, but I'm not sure how much perspective I can offer. I'm as confused as everyone else. An elderly Zareth with white crystalline patterns on his skin leaned forward. His robes marked him as Elder Vorith, the same advisor who'd conducted the ceremony. Confusion is natural when reality diverges from expectation. But confusion can be refined into understanding through examination. Tell us, Marcus Webb, what is your experience with children? Marcus glanced at Captain Rodriguez, who gave him a tiny nod. Permission to speak freely. I've worked with a lot of kids in crisis situations. War zones, disaster areas, places where the normal support structures had broken down. Part of being a combat medic is dealing with traumatized children. You learn pretty quickly that scared kids don't care about your rank or your species. They care about whether you're going to help them or hurt them. And how do you demonstrate that you will help? Another elder asked, this one wearing robes marked with symbols. Marcus's implant identified as medical or scientific. You stay calm. You keep your voice steady. You don't make sudden movements. You let them come to you instead of forcing yourself on them. And most importantly, you don't lie. Kids have good instincts for honesty. If you tell them it's going to be okay, you'd better mean it. Elder Voritha's ears, which Marcus was learning to read as indicators of emotional state, tilted forward in interest. And when you encountered Prince Kale, you employed these techniques? Not consciously. I just stood still because moving seemed like a bad idea. But yeah, I guess those old instincts kicked in. The kid was scared, overwhelmed, looking for an exit. I wasn't threatening him, wasn't trying to control him, wasn't adding to the noise. I was just there. Just there, the Queen repeated thoughtfully. Yet my grandson perceived you as something more than simply present. He perceived you as safe, as protective, as what he termed quiet. This is not a common perception. Princess Sienna spoke up. I have spent time with Marcus since the ceremony. With my permission, Kale remained in his presence. I observed their interaction. Marcus is genuine in his calm. It is not performance. He truly does not wish my son harm. More than that, he instinctively moves to ensure Kale's comfort. When Kale came close, Marcus adjusted his posture to be less imposing. When Kale seemed uncertain, Marcus offered reassurance. These were not calculated diplomatic gestures. They were automatic responses. The responses of a protector, Elder Vorith said. Of one whose nature is to shield the vulnerable. Marcus felt uncomfortable with that characterization. I'm not some kind of saint. I'm just a guy who spent too many years watching kids suffer and decided I'd rather prevent suffering when I could. And this desire, the scientific elder said, this drive to prevent suffering, particularly in children, it is fundamental to your nature? I mean, I'd hope it's fundamental to most people's nature. Wanting to protect kids isn't exactly revolutionary. For humans, perhaps not. But you must understand, Marcus Webb, that empathic sensitivity to non-kin is rare in our species. We care deeply for our own children, our own bloodlines, but we do not typically extend that protective instinct to outsiders. The fact that you do, and that Kale can perceive this quality in you, is remarkable. Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat. If I may, Your Majesty, what are the implications of this situation for diplomatic relations? Lieutenant Webb acted without authorization, but he also did not initiate the contact. I'm uncertain about protocol here. The Queen's expression softened slightly. Captain, be at ease. We do not hold your crewmen responsible for my grandson's choice. Rather, we view this as an unexpected opportunity. For decades, our peoples have maintained cordial but distant relations. We cooperate on matters of trade, but we do not truly understand each other. This incident suggests that perhaps our understanding has been incomplete. How so, Your Majesty? Rodriguez asked. Elder Vorith answered. We believed humans to be emotionally opaque, functionally unreadable to our empathic senses. This led us to assume humans were either emotionally primitive or fundamentally alien in their internal experiences. But Prince Kale's response suggests neither is true. Humans do emit emotional patterns that Zareth can perceive, but those patterns exist in ranges we have not learned to detect. Children, whose senses are still developing and unfiltered, can perceive these ranges. You're saying your adults are emotionally blind to us, but your kids aren't? Marcus asked. A crude but essentially accurate assessment, the scientific elder confirmed. Our adult Zareth have spent lifetimes filtering sensory input, learning to focus on certain frequencies and ignore others. But children have not yet learned these filters. They perceive the full spectrum, including the ranges where human emotions exist. Princess Sienna leaned forward. This changes everything. If our children can sense humans accurately, then everything we assumed about your species requires reconsideration. You are not the emotionally cold, calculating beings our intelligence suggested. You are simply broadcasting on frequencies we did not know to listen for. Marcus processed this. So basically, we've been trying to communicate, but we've been using radio waves and you've been listening for light signals. An excellent analogy, Elder Vorith said. And now, through your interaction with Prince Kale, we have discovered that we do possess the capability to detect your signals. We simply must learn to listen correctly. The Queen stood and everyone in the room instinctively straightened. Marcus Webb, I have a proposal. You will remain here in the palace for the duration of your diplomatic mission. You will spend time with my grandson under supervision, allowing us to study this connection. We will learn what his empathic senses perceive in you, and through this understanding, we may learn to perceive it ourselves. In return, you will have the gratitude of the Zareth sovereignty and perhaps a place in history as the bridge between our peoples. Marcus looked at Captain Rodriguez, who seemed to be running through diplomatic calculations at high speed. Finally, the captain nodded. If Lieutenant Webb agrees, the Terran Alliance would support this arrangement. The potential for improved understanding between our species is significant. Everyone looked at Marcus. He thought about saying no, about explaining that he was just a maintenance engineer who'd stumbled into something way above his pay grade. He thought about his quiet life fixing air recyclers and avoiding meaningful human contact. Then he thought about Kale's small hand holding his sleeve, about that warmth in his chest that felt like connection he hadn't experienced since his medic days, about the possibility that his particular brand of broken might actually be useful for something. Okay, he said. I'll do it. But I have conditions. The Queen's ears tilted forward in surprise. You negotiate with royalty? I negotiate with anyone who wants me to do something I'm not obligated to do. First condition, I'm not performing in some kind of experiment. If Kale and I spend time together, it's because he wants to, not because scientists are forcing data collection. Second condition, the moment the kid seems uncomfortable or stressed, we stop. I don't care how important the research is. His well-being comes first. Third condition, I'm still just Marcus. Not Lieutenant Webb, or diplomatic representative, or whatever other title people want to stick on me. I'm a guy with a toolbox who apparently gives off calm vibes. That's it. Silence filled the chamber. Captain Rodriguez had gone pale again. Then unexpectedly Queen Lishra laughed. It was a sound like crystal bells, bright and genuine. You are either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish to make demands of a sovereign. But I find I respect it. Very well, Marcus, who is just Marcus. Your conditions are acceptable. You will spend time with Kale as friends, not as experiment subjects. His comfort will be paramount. And you will remain yourself without titles or pretense. She sat back down, her expression becoming serious again. But understand this. What you are agreeing to may change the course of human-Zareth relations for generations. The bridge you build with my grandson may support the weight of countless future interactions between our peoples. That is a significant responsibility. I've had significant responsibilities before, Marcus said quietly. They usually involved keeping people from dying. This seems easier. Do not be so certain, Elder Vorith said. The death of the body is simple compared to the death of possibility. What you attempt here, creating understanding where none existed, is among the most difficult tasks any being can undertake. Marcus shrugged. Then I guess it's a good thing I'm too stupid to know that I should be terrified. Princess Sienna smiled. You are not stupid, Marcus. You are simply willing to try when others would retreat into safety. That is not stupidity. That is courage. The meeting continued for another hour, working out logistics and protocols and all the boring details that Marcus had hoped to avoid. But through it all, he kept thinking about Kale's description of him. A deep pool where the water is still. It wasn't how Marcus thought of himself. He'd always felt more like a storm barely contained, all the trauma and pain and anger just beneath the surface, held back by sheer force of will. But maybe that was the point. Maybe after years of forcing himself to be calm for other people's sake, he'd actually become calm. Maybe the performance had become reality. Maybe the mask had become the face. When the meeting finally ended, Princess Sienna approached him. Kale will want to see you before sleep cycle. Would you join us in the residential wing? Lead the way, Your Highness. Sienna, she corrected. If you are to be part of my son's life, even temporarily, you may use my name. Only if you stop calling me Lieutenant. It's Marcus. Very well, Marcus. Follow me. The residential wing of the palace was less formal than the public areas, though still impossibly beautiful. The walls here displayed what looked like memories, images that shifted and flowed like living photographs. Sienna noticed him looking. These are our family histories. Moments of significance, preserved in crystal memory. Each generation adds their own. That must make it hard to forget things you'd rather leave behind. She glanced back at him, something knowing in her expression. You speak from experience. I speak from PTSD. Same thing basically. They reached a chamber where Kale was waiting, already wearing what Marcus assumed were pajamas, though they looked more like clouds that had been convinced to hold a child-shaped form. The boy's face lit up when he saw Marcus and he ran forward, stopping just short of collision. You came, Kale said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. I promised I would. I don't break promises to friends. We are friends? Kale asked, hope and wonder mixing in his tone. Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to the child's eye level. Yeah, buddy. I think we are. Is that okay? Kale nodded emphatically, then did something that made Marcus's chest tighten. The child pressed his small hand against Marcus's chest, right over his heart, and closed his eyes. Marcus felt that warmth intensify, felt the presence of Kale's consciousness brushing against his own like a gentle wave. I hear it, Kale whispered. The quiet. It is real. You are real. I did not imagine you. I'm real, Marcus confirmed softly. And so is the quiet. You can count on it. Sienna watched this exchange with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. When Kale finally pulled away, she guided him toward his bed, which seemed to be made of solidified starlight. Sleep now, sweetness. Marcus will return tomorrow. Promise? Kale asked, looking at Marcus. Promise. I'll be here as long as you want me around. The child smiled, an expression of pure joy that transcended species barriers, and climbed into his bed. Sienna performed what looked like a nightly ritual, touching Kale's forehead and whispering something in Zareth that the implant translated as a blessing for peaceful dreams and safe journeys through the night. Outside the chamber, Sienna turned to Marcus. Thank you. He has not settled this easily in months. The pressure of his position, the constant scrutiny, it weighs on him. But with you he relaxes. You provide something he desperately needs. What's that? Permission to be a child. In your presence he does not have to be the heir or the future of our people. He can simply be Kale. That is a gift beyond measure. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. I'm just being myself. It's not like I'm doing anything special. That is precisely what makes it special. You are not performing. You are not calculating diplomatic advantage. You are simply being Marcus, who carries old sadness worn smooth like river stones, who wants to help, who makes the hurting stop. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and Marcus felt a gentle warmth similar to but different from what he felt with Kale. My son has chosen well. I trust his instincts and therefore I trust you. I'll try to be worthy of that trust. You already are. The next 3 days established a pattern. Mornings, Marcus performed his nominal duties, checking systems on the diplomatic vessel and helping with various maintenance tasks that needed human-sized hands and human engineering knowledge. Afternoons, he spent with Kale, initially under close supervision that gradually relaxed as the Zareth observers realized that Marcus truly posed no threat. They did simple things. Marcus taught Kale about human games, explaining the concept of tag and hide and seek, which apparently translated across species fairly well. Kale taught Marcus about Zareth music, which wasn't sound so much as crystalline vibrations that you felt in your bones. They drew pictures, Kale creating elaborate light paintings with his fingers while Marcus made clumsy sketches with borrowed materials. But mostly they just talked. Or rather, Kale talked and Marcus listened, letting the child ramble about his fears and hopes and all the complicated feelings that came with being a royal heir to a species that valued emotional control. Marcus shared stories too, carefully edited versions of his time in the Relief Corps, focusing on the moments of connection and hope rather than the trauma. You saved many lives, Kale said one afternoon as they sat in one of the palace gardens, surrounded by plants that glowed with soft bioluminescence. I tried. Didn't always succeed. But you tried. That is what matters. Mother says trying with full heart is its own form of success. Your mother is wise. She is lonely, Kale said, with the blunt honesty of children everywhere. Father went to the stars 3 cycles ago. She says he became one with the cosmic flow, but I know that means he died. She pretends to be strong, but inside she is sad. Like you are sad but different. Marcus felt that observation like a gentle knife. Grief is like that. Everyone carries it differently. Do you grieve, Marcus? Every day. For the people I couldn't save. For the person I used to be before I saw too much. For the simple certainty I had before I learned how random and unfair the universe could be. But you still try to help. Even with the grief. Especially with the grief. Because I know what it feels like to hurt, and I don't want other people to hurt that way if I can prevent it. Cale was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he said, I am glad you are here, Marcus. You make the loud quieter. You make the heavy lighter. You make me feel like maybe I can do this. Be what they need me to be. Marcus pulled the child close, an instinctive gesture that Cale immediately relaxed into. You already are what they need you to be, buddy. You're smart, kind, brave, and you care about people. The rest is just learning in time. You'll figure it out. Will you help me figure it out? As long as you need me. It was a promise Marcus hoped he could keep. On the 5th day something shifted. Marcus was working in the garden with Cale when a group of Zareth nobles entered, their formal robes indicating this was some kind of official visit. Among them was an elderly female with white crystalline patterns that covered most of her visible skin, marking her as exceptionally old even by Zareth standards. She approached slowly, her movements careful but dignified, and studied Marcus with those star-filled eyes. So you are the human child who has charmed our prince. I'm the human maintenance engineer who ended up in the right place at the right time, ma'am. The charming part was all Cale. She made a sound that might have been laughter. Honest. That is rare in palace walls. I am Elder Thessa, Minister of Cultural Integration. I have been studying the reports of your interaction with Prince Cale. And I believe you may have solved a problem we did not know how to articulate. For decades, we have struggled to understand human emotion. We formed treaties with beings we could not truly perceive, conducting diplomacy in darkness. But you have shown us that the light was always there. We were simply looking at the wrong frequencies. I'm not sure I did anything that impressive. I just stood still while a kid decided I was safe. That act of stillness, that moment of allowing yourself to be chosen rather than forcing interaction, that demonstrated a fundamental understanding of Zareth psychology that our own diplomats failed to grasp. She gestured to the other nobles. We have been discussing a proposal. With your permission and the permission of your captain, we would like to establish a cultural exchange program. Human children and Zareth children, learning together, perceiving each other without the filters their adults have developed. Building understanding from the ground up. Marcus blinked. You want to base an entire diplomatic program on the fact that your kid liked me? We want to base a diplomatic program on the demonstrable fact that our children can perceive your children accurately, and through that perception, our species might finally truly understand each other. You have proven it is possible. We wish to explore that possibility systematically. Cale tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Does this mean more human friends? It means, Elder Thessa said, her tone softening as she addressed the child, that you may help build bridges between stars, young prince. You and Marcus together. The enormity of what they were suggesting hit Marcus all at once. Not just his relationship with Cale, but the potential for changing how humans and Zareth interacted at a fundamental level. Building connections through children who hadn't yet learned to see differences as barriers. I'm just one guy, Marcus said quietly. I'm not qualified to design diplomatic programs or cultural exchanges. I fix things that break. You fixed something that was broken, Elder Thessa replied. The distance between our peoples. The assumption that understanding was impossible. You fixed it simply by being yourself. That is qualification enough. Princess Sienna arrived then, moving through the garden with fluid grace. She'd been spending more time with Marcus over the past few days, initially to supervise his interactions with Cale but gradually shifting into something that felt almost like friendship. The council has approved Elder Thessa's proposal, she announced. Pending Terran Alliance agreement, we will begin planning the cultural exchange program. Marcus, you will be asked to serve as a consultant if you are willing. Consultant for what? Being emotionally accessible to empathic alien children? That's not exactly a skill set I trained for. No, Sienna agreed. But it is a skill set you possess naturally. Your calm, your genuine care, your ability to provide safety without dominance. These are teachable qualities. You can help train human participants to interact with Zareth children effectively. And perhaps, through that training, help our adults learn to perceive your emotional patterns as well. Marcus looked at Cale, who was watching him with those large, hopeful eyes. He thought about all the scared kids he'd treated in war zones, all the moments where his calm had meant the difference between panic and stability. He thought about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, his particular brand of broken could be useful on a scale he'd never imagined. Okay, he said. I'll help. But I'm warning you, I'm going to insist on lots of breaks, minimal formality, and the right to say, this is stupid, if any of your plans get too complicated. Elder Thessa's ears tilted in what Marcus had learned to recognize as amusement. Agreed. We will value your perspective precisely because it is unfiltered by diplomatic conditioning. Over the next few hours they discussed details. The cultural exchange would start small, just a few families carefully selected and trained. Marcus would spend several months working with human families, teaching them about Xerath empathic sensitivity and how to present themselves as calm, accessible emotional presences. Xerath facilitators would do the same with their participants. Captain Rodriguez, when informed, looked like he couldn't decide whether to celebrate or retire early. You realize this is going to make you famous, right? The maintenance guy who accidentally revolutionized human-Xerath relations. I'd really prefer to stay unfamous if that's an option. It's not, Rodriguez said, but he was smiling. But I'll do what I can to protect your privacy. You've earned that much. The final evening before the diplomatic mission was scheduled to depart, Queen Lishra held a farewell ceremony. It was smaller than the initial greeting, more intimate, with only the royal family and a few key advisors present. Marcus wore his dress uniform again, though someone had apparently arranged for it to actually fit this time. The queen stood before him, regal and powerful, but with something softer in her expression than he'd seen during their first meeting. Marcus Webb, you came to our world as a minor functionary, expected to stand in the background and be forgotten. Instead, you have become something unprecedented. My grandson calls you friend. My daughter calls you ally. And I, after much observation and consideration, call you bridge builder. She produced something from her robes, a small crystal pendant on a silver chain. This is a token of the House of Lishra. It marks you as friend of the crown with all the privileges and protections that entails. Should you ever return to our world, you will be welcomed not as a stranger but as family. Marcus accepted the pendant with hands that weren't quite steady. Your Majesty, I don't know what to say. Then say nothing. Simply continue being who you are. Continue providing that stillness, that quiet that my grandson perceives. Continue teaching others how to build bridges where there were only gaps. That will be thanks enough. Kale stepped forward then, holding something in both hands. It was a small crystal sculpture, roughly the size of Marcus's palm, shaped like a human heart. I made this, the child said. It shows what I sense in you. The quiet place where sadness lives but does not rule. The place where helping lives and never stops. I want you to keep it so you remember that someone sees you truly. Marcus knelt down, accepting the gift with a care that bordered on reverence. The crystal was warm, pulsing with gentle light that seemed to beat in rhythm with his own heart. Thank you, Kale. I'll treasure this. And I'll come back to visit, I promise. You promise? I promise. Friends don't abandon each other, remember? The child threw his arms around Marcus's neck, holding tight, and Marcus felt that warmth in his chest bloom into something almost overwhelming. Not painful but profound. The sensation of being truly seen, truly valued, by someone who perceived emotional truth without filters or pretense. When they finally separated, Princess Sienna stepped forward. You have given my son something precious. The knowledge that he can trust his perceptions, that his empathic senses reveal truth rather than deception. That confidence will shape the leader he becomes. He was already going to be a great leader, Marcus said. He's got a good heart. Everything else is just details. Nevertheless, you have helped that heart remain open and kind rather than becoming closed and cautious. That is the greater gift. The ceremony concluded with traditional blessings, and Marcus found himself oddly emotional as he prepared to leave. He'd been on this world less than 2 weeks, but it felt like something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of himself and his place in the universe. Captain Rodriguez found him later, as Marcus was packing his sparse belongings. You okay, Lieutenant? I'm not sure. I came here expecting to stand in the background and be forgotten. Instead, I'm apparently some kind of diplomatic consultant and bridge builder. It's a lot. It is. But you handled it well. Better than most would have. I just did what felt right. Treated a scared kid like a scared kid instead of a political opportunity. That's exactly why it worked. You didn't overthink it. You just responded with basic decency and genuine care. Rodriguez paused. For what it's worth, I'm recommending you for commendation. And I'm personally requesting that you be assigned to the exchange program full-time. We need people like you, Marcus. People who see beyond protocols and procedures to the actual beings we're trying to connect with. Marcus looked at the crystal heart Kale had given him, watching the light pulse within. I never wanted to be important. I just wanted to fix things and not hurt anymore. Maybe fixing things and being important aren't mutually exclusive. Maybe you can fix things on a bigger scale now. Fix the broken connections between species. Fix the assumption that understanding is impossible. Rodriguez smiled. Besides, you're not important. You're just Marcus, right? The guy with a toolbox who gives off calm vibes. When did you get so wise? When I watched a maintenance engineer teach me more about diplomacy in 5 days than I learned in 5 years of formal training. The shuttle ride back to the horizon's edge was quiet. Marcus sat by the window watching the crystalline palace shrink below him, becoming just another point of light on a planet full of lights. In his hand, he held Kale's gift, feeling its warmth against his palm, feeling the truth of what the child had perceived in him. A deep pool where the water is still. Maybe that was okay. Maybe after all the chaos and pain and trauma, finding stillness was its own form of strength. Maybe being the quiet place where scared people could rest was a purpose as valid as any other. His implant chimed with an incoming message. He opened it and found a simple text from Princess Sienna. Kale asks when you will return. I told him soon. Please do not make me a liar. Marcus smiled and typed back. Tell him I'll be back before the next cycle. And tell him Marcus keeps his promises. He sent the message and leaned back in his seat, exhausted but somehow more at peace than he'd been in years. He'd come to this world as a broken man with a toolbox, trying to be invisible, trying not to matter. He was leaving as something else. Not fixed, he'd probably never be fully fixed, but useful. Connected. See. A bridge between worlds, built on nothing more complicated than genuine care and the simple willingness to be still when a scared child needed shelter. As the shuttle broke atmosphere and the stars filled the viewport, Marcus thought about the future. About the cultural exchange program and the children who would learn to see each other without filters. About the bridges that would be built on the foundation he and Kale had inadvertently created. It was a lot of responsibility for a guy who just wanted to fix air recyclers. But maybe, Marcus thought, maybe he could handle it. After all, he'd kept scared kids alive in war zones with nothing but bandages and stubborn refusal to give up. Teaching people to understand each other? That seemed easier. The crystal heart pulsed in his hand, warm and steady, and Marcus closed his eyes, letting himself feel the connection that spanned the growing distance between him and a small alien child who saw truth. He was the quiet place, the still water, the refuge, and for the first time in years that felt like enough.